Hi, Brian. How are you?
Good, Joyce. How are you doing this morning?
Good, good. A lot of our followers were very excited about the last video that we did about is the IRS going to come to your door or call you? So I'm really excited about this one about tax identity uh, fraud, I think it's called. So why don't you explain that for everybody?
So, so we call it tax-related identity theft, and it comes in
Okay.
a variety of forms. The worst form is when someone takes your personal information and files a tax return without your permission. Causes a lot of headaches. Your refund may get tied up for a while. You have to prove who you are. And then more recently, we've seen individuals taking someone's social security number and using it to work somewhere. And then what
Oh,
happens is you get stuck with basically the income or the unemployment benefits. So those are like the two most common things. But the good news is we're not seeing as much as we used to, and there's a
oh,
remedy
okay.
from the IRS in case it does happen to you.
Okay, wow, that's awesome that it's gone down. You mentioned that someone takes your social security number and uses it for work, and then you, as the taxpayer, would get stuck having to pay taxes on that income, but you never actually received it. Is that something that's new, or has that been going on for a long time?
So it's been going on for a long time because there are individuals who are in this country who don't have a legal right to work. Basically, they don't have a social security number or
Got it.
an ID number. So we've seen it where someone will get something from the IRS saying you worked at some company. If you didn't work at that company and you got something from the IRS, do not ignore it. You need to respond to that notice. But then
Okay.
also recently during the pandemic, we saw a lot of unemployment being paid out to people under other using your social security number, and you didn't actually receive that unemployment. So if you get a letter from, say, the state of Arizona or whatever state you live in, do not ignore that. Respond to that and tell them, no, someone used my social security number. It's been compromised. I did not work at that company. I did not receive those benefits.
You know, that's interesting. During the pandemic, I read a lot of articles, and it wasn't just Arizona, it was a lot of states having some issues with unemployment fraud. So I'm guessing that this is part of that, would be the tail end of it, where people would be getting the statements saying they received unemployment benefits. So,
You're absolutely correct. Many states across this country were victimized by criminal bands, basically organized groups that were targeting the various states and reaping huge amounts of unemployment payments. And but to do that, they needed social security numbers, and a lot of
right.
times they were stolen and compromised. So that's why it's
Uh,
so important to not ignore anything you get in the mail.
okay. All right. Well, that's great information. So are there remedies out there that people have? And are these remedies something that really are going to help you once you find out that someone has filed a tax return in your name and social security, or in your social security number, or used it to work for someplace or to get unemployment benefits?
So let's say somebody filed a tax return using your social security number. You
Mhm.
know, you only file one, most people only file one tax return a year.
Right.
So what a lot of times happens is, let's say you go to file in February or March, and the IRS will send a letter back to you saying you've already filed. You can't file twice.
Oh,
And then
okay.
that's the huge clue that someone used your personal information to file a tax return. So at that point, you respond to the letter. You'll be filling out an identity theft affidavit, and basically it just starts a process where you prove who you are. If you were due a refund, you're going to get your refund, but it's going to take some extra time. That's one of the reasons we tell people not to have a huge refund coming to them, because if it were held up for some reason, you're out of that money for a while. And then here's the other good thing: if you are a victim of ID theft when it comes to tax returns, you'll be getting an identity protection PIN. And it's basically a
Oh,
6-digit number. Think of it as a password for your tax return.
Got it.
And then that way, the only thing worse than being victimized is being victimized twice by possibly the same people. So this prevents that from happening again. And then one more other thing to tag on to that, the identity protection pin is available to anybody who wants it. You can actually opt in by going to irs.gov. My personal prediction is in the future, we're all going to have this 6-digit pin, but we're just slowly phasing it in to people who are either victims of ID theft or people who just want to be very proactive and not be victimized in the future.
Wow. Okay. So you don't have to be victimized in order to get this personal identity PIN. And so explain a little bit more about how that PIN, that personal identity PIN works.
That's right. So when you file your tax return, either online at home by yourself, if you self-prepare, or you go to a paid return preparer, before the return can be filed with the IRS, the 6-digit PIN has to be entered into the system. And you get a
Okay.
new PIN each year. It's not like a
Oh,
lifetime PIN.
okay.
It's done every 6 years. I'm sorry, that 6-digit PIN is every single year. It has to be redone.
Okay.
But you cannot, if your return requires a PIN, it cannot be filed without it. So let's say you're sitting in your CPA's office before they can hit send on that electronically filed return, and that's the way we want people to file is electronically. They'll have to have that those 6 digits.
And that's awesome that you get a new PIN every year because if you kept the same PIN, kind of like the same password, eventually scammers are going to figure out ways to get that PIN from you, just like they figured out ways to get a multi-factor authentication code from you. You know, so that's great that you guys are providing new pins each year, and that's available to anybody. They just need to go online to irs.gov. And is there something that they type in the search bar in order to find where they can apply for it?
Yeah, I tried it yesterday just to practice it. Go to the main search bar on irs.gov. You can type in identity protection or ID PIN, and it'll come up. And now is a good time of the year as we're near the end of the end of the calendar year. It's a good time to request that PIN now if you choose to do so. That way, when you file between January, February, March, April, whenever you file, you'll have that PIN and you'll be ready to go.
Okay, great. Um, so one thing I thought about as you were talking about this, is there certain information that you have to put into the system in order to prove to the system that it's you in order to get that PIN? Because I'm wondering if scammers have certain pieces of information, if they would be able to go online and get a PIN in someone else's name.
Right. So the IRS has safeguards
Okay.
for requesting the identity protection PIN and also transcripts. A lot of people go online and request their transcripts. You
Okay.
will have to prove, in addition to your social security number, you'll also have to provide most likely an address. And then a lot of times they ask for your AGI from a prior tax return or other information from a prior tax return that a criminal would not have. So
Got it.
there's multiple steps to prevent fraud,
Okay.
because yeah, that's the last thing the IRS wants is
Right.
criminals out there creating fake PIN numbers for someone else. So
Exactly. Yeah.
we definitely don't want that.
Yeah, that would add another layer on trying to prove that it's that it's not the right person. So, well, that's great. It sounds like you guys have gone through and you've kind of thought through the process, and I think this is a great thing. I would suggest that everybody go out and get this pin. I think that's one of the first things I'm going to do maybe this weekend. I'm going to write a note to myself on my calendar. Um, Question though that just came to mind. So people that file married filing jointly, so they file the same tax return. Is it just the first person that's listed on the tax return that gets the PIN, or does each person, like my husband and I file married filing jointly? So would the PIN be under his name, or would we each have our own PIN?
I am not sure on that. It's I don't know. because I
Okay.
have not actually done it myself.
Okay.
Because I typically filed very early. I file in January. So
Okay.
my chances, end of January, so my chances of being victimized by ID theft are pretty low, but it still could happen. But I'm not 100% sure on that. It's
Okay.
either going to be one or two pins.
Okay. I'm guessing that when someone goes in to request the PIN, that those types of questions are asked. Because normally when you get a notice from the IRS on your tax return, like if my husband and I get one, it normally comes in his social security number because it's the first one listed. So I'm guessing you'd want to at least have a pin on whoever that first person is on that first social security number. But you had something that you had just said. I had a question that came in my head, and then when I started talking, it went out of my head. Oh, you talked about you file in January
Yes.
and you file very early. So does it help against the tax identity theft if you file early?
It does. And what I want people also to realize is we don't want people out there stressing that someone is going to file a tax return in your name. There are 155 million tax returns, 1040s filed each year,
Wow,
and the number of the tax-related ID theft numbers are going down each year. But
good.
but we have found that a lot of the criminals like to file as soon as possible. So the sooner you file, the less likely it's going to happen. But then obviously there are a lot of people out there with very complicated taxes
Right,
that struggle to get it done by April 15th. And a lot of times they go on extension until October 15th. So
right.
to anybody out there, please don't stress about this. If it does happen to you, there's a remedy at the IRS. Our numbers have gone down tremendously. But when the tax related identity theft was at its height about 8 to 10 years ago, I actually had a friend of mine call me, and he had prepared his tax return and filed it around Martin Luther King holiday weekend, which is mid
Wow,
January.
right.
And by about January 20th or 25th, he already got notice from the IRS that someone had filed a tax return in his name.
Oh,
And he
wow.
was very stressed about it. And he said, I filed early. I said, well, don't worry about it. We'll get it resolved. And he did. It took a while. Trust me, it's a hassle. But he ended up getting his refunds. It's not the end of the world. And the good news is the prevalence of this type of fraud is definitely going down. What we are seeing more, though, as we mentioned at the beginning, is the use of criminals using social security numbers to basically get unemployment
Got it.
payments. So that's definitely more common, and that's why we really want people to respond to any sort of inquiry they get from the state they live in or from the IRS.
Got it. So if somebody does get a letter in the mail saying that they've already filed, um, that that they should use the contact information in that letter to get a hold of the IRS to start the process to remedy the situation. That's the best way to start that process is to respond to that letter. They'll have contact information in there for you to call and start the process that there was a fraudulent return filed.
There is, and I would start
Okay.
with the number on that letter because the IRS, as I mentioned in our previous Zoom, is we're
Yeah.
old school. We send things by mail with explanations in it. And we also like to send people to irs.gov. Our website is a wealth of information. We have a whole section called the Taxpayer Guide to Identity Theft. Whether you think you're a victim of ID theft because you received a letter from the IRS saying a return's been filed, or you just want to take some proactive steps to prevent identity theft in the future, it's a good place to start. Some good resources and some links where you can go to find out more information about possible tax related identity theft.
Okay. All right. Well, that's great information. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me. And we'll do this again and pick out another topic. We want everybody, our focus is on seniors, but we want everybody to stay safe and make sure that they get whatever tax benefits there are coming to them, and not have to pay tax on income that they didn't receive. So like with the unemployment benefits and stuff like that. So thank you again, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joyce. It was a pleasure.